Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I hope and trust that you are all well. Before I get started, I would like to give a very special shout out to the reform members of Back to Ashes. Tavia S., Tina Mead, Cindy Cleveland, Patty's niece, Samantha Place, Inner Scare Wifey, and the rest of the membership is right here on your screen. If you like what you are hearing throughout this narration, you can buy me a coffee, or if you would like to become a member of Back to Ashes, all of that information can be found in the description below. With all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For when we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for this dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Deep Ocean Stories. Right after this introduction, an ad will play. I'll read the first story an ad will play, and after that, there will be no more ads within this video. I was working on a car carrier 4 years ago in the Middle East. Our typical route went through pirate waters at times, and so we always picked up 4 ex-Marines as security in Aqaba, Jordan, before we went. One night, while we were going through pirate waters off of Yemen, we started to have problems with the main engine. So we stopped and had to drift for a bit to figure out what the problem was. During this time, I was working on the stern, the back end, of the vessel. I couldn't really see anything out in the ocean. Everything was dimly lit on the ship. I don't know why, but I got bored and turned on the spotlight, and there he was. This guy with a gun in a rusted little sailboat staring at me about 15 feet from the ship. I stared back at him, kind of stunned. I was afraid if I reached for the radio to call one of the Marines, he'd shoot me. The Marines had weapons. So he looks at me and I looked at him, and he sort of gave me a nod as if he was telling me, "Well played," and I gave him one back. Then he slowly rowed his boat back off into the deep, pitch-black night. I didn't know how many others there were, but I did call it in on the radio as soon as I lost sight of him. I still remember his face today, that deep, stern, concentrated look. While underway in Lake Huron at about 2 o'clock, our small boat crew decided to go investigate this old offshore gypsum loading dock. It's about 3 stories tall and had been abandoned for many years. It was a really creepy looking place. Anyway, we are just putzing around this thing when we see what looks like a spotlight shine directly onto the outside wall of the dock. The spotlight was a perfect circle about 5 feet in diameter, bright white, and only shine for a few seconds, but it was enough time for it to make a large figure 8. Now, this gypsum dock was about a half a mile out into the lake, so we are thinking there is no way someone from shore could have done this. We tried everything to recreate the spotlight effect. We drove around who knows how many times to see if it was something reflecting off the boat. We used our flashlights, our signal mirrors, using moonlight, even our own small boat's spotlight, and nothing matched how perfectly round and bright the original light was. We chalked it up to aliens and got the hell out of there. Okay, so this happened in Maine, when I was about 3 years old, maybe almost 4. I was at the beach with my mom. We went as a group with some other stay-at-home moms and their kids. It was a fairly hot and crowded day there, and I found myself playing with the other kids at the edge of the water. For some reason, I strayed away a bit, and that's when a middle-aged woman started talking to me. I remember her very clearly. She looked like a mother would, with a nice one-piece black bathing suit, cargo shorts, sunglasses, and her hair pulled up in a bun. She asked me what games I liked to play and what my favorite candy was. As soon as I told her, I believe I said Tootsie Pops. She said she had some in her car and persuaded me to come with her. Yes, I know, I was quite the naive child. She was cheerful and enthusiastic, taking my hand and leading me away through the crowded beach. I skipped along her and had no fear whatsoever. Then, thank my lucky stars, my mom spotted me from a distance and started screaming my name at the top of her lungs and jumping up and down while waving her arms. The woman immediately let go of my hand and darted away. I just stood there, terribly confused, until my mom got to me. I get chills thinking about it now. She seemed so nice at the time, though I admit I was way too trusting. It stinks of an attempted kidnapping now. If my mom hadn't have spotted me, who knows where I would be, or if I would even be alive. This didn't happen to me, but my father. He joined the Navy somewhere around 80 or 84. He's told me many stories over the years, but one that sticks out in my mind the most was his first time at sea on a submarine. He recently got promoted and opted to become a submariner because of the exclusivity of the position. Less crew, usually one room for 1 to 2 people of your specific trade. Basically, you have to be the best to get on a sub. Anyway, his first night out at sea on a submarine, and everyone is asleep in their bunks. If you haven't seen them, they usually stack 2 to 3 high and line the side of the hull in a long hallway type formation. Dad got stuck in one bunk in the very back. He wakes up at around 2 a.m. to alarms and lights going off. Everyone rushing out of their bunks and out the hatch into the next section of the marine. Dad, being the last to wake up and the last of the bunks, ended up to the latch too late. It closed, sealed, and locked in front of him, with someone shouting on the other side, "Mike, find the leak!" Apparently a leak had sprung somewhere around the bunks. It either had to be fixed or that section of submarine would have to stay sealed to prevent the water from spreading, leading to him drowning. Eventually he found it, sealed it, and the hatch was opened. He has a ton of stories, but this one scared the shit out of him the most. Some years ago, when I was 8, my grandfather took me fishing in a little motorboat a couple miles offshore in the Atlantic. After an hour, in which we caught nothing, he tried to start the motor to return. No luck. After 15 minutes of effort and cursing the likes of which I had never heard, he undid the clamp holding the motor on and dropped it to the bottom of the ocean. He then started rowing back. He pooped out a mile offshore and we were being carried rapidly towards some exposed rocks. A large motor yacht approached. I started jumping up and down and screaming. Gramps told me to sit down and shut up. Apparently, the law of the sea or some such says that if you ask for help, the person giving aid can claim your boat. So we waited until they offered help and got towed in. We had just entered Fifth Fleet and taken responsibility as the main carrier when we got word that pirates were trying to capture an American boat. I forget what kind, it happens a lot. In the Indian Ocean. Our captain got on the 1MC and said there's some bad people trying to do some bad things to some good Americans, and we're going to get them. We sped down there, almost leaving our escort behind, and then they called for the Snoopy team. I was a Snoopy team guy, and the Snoopy team runs to the top of the island and reports what they see. Whether it's a plane, MB, or anything really. We saw them and apparently the American boat escaped. They were in some crappy vessel when we got so close to them that we lost sight of them from up top. We were probably only like 30 yards away when we saw a guy go on their dock and point a rocket launcher at us. I don't know why, but me and the other dude I was with were all like, "Bring it, guys, bring it," waving our hands and shit. The camera guy even took a picture, but the rocket launcher dude must have thought better of it and went back inside. We stayed watching them for a bit, and the Indians came and asked if we planned to engage. We said no, and they asked us to step back. Then they proceeded to mess up that crappy ship. After they secured the Snoopy team, I went back and was looking at the pictures when me and my buddy was like, "Dude, you could have died by rocket launcher." I laughed it off. Man, that could have went very badly. I was in Bermuda in the off-season, I think, with my mom, dad, and little brother. I must have been about 5 or so. It was before my other brother was born and my sister was born. I remember the hotel was empty and a man with a red vest and shirt got me some milk. I remember the beach was very empty. Just so you know, most of the place was empty. Cheaper maybe for us to go? I was on the beach with my parents and my 2 to 3 year old brother, who was with all of us. I ran off to explore. I saw my mom on the beach. "Come on, Nate." There was a thicket area of scrubby bushes and trees along the beach. She went up into it. There was this cement square with pipes or vents or something coming out of it. She stood there, then saw me coming and kept walking into the thicket. I felt something was wrong, but didn't want to be defiant, so I pretended I was really interested in the pipe things and said aloud, "I wonder what these are for," or something like that. So if she got mad, I could say I was interested in the pipes or something, just not disobeying. As soon as she went out of view into the thicket, my dad came up from the beach to where I was and yelled, "Where have you been? Don't wander off like that," or something similar. He took my hand roughly and led me back to the beach where my mother and brother were. I still don't know what the hell happened. The woman looked exactly like my mom, but felt very wrong. This happened on a trip sanctioned by my former high school. We went to Russia and had a wonderful time in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The travel agency, in a bid to get more money, offered us an extension to Tallinn, Estonia, and Helsinki, Finland. Being school kids out of the United States, some of us for the very first time, of course, we took it. We took an uneventful trip on a bus to Estonia and then a ship to cross the Baltic Sea into Finland. The trip leader decided that we had been pretty damn responsible for the past week and a half and told us we could sit or eat wherever we wanted and told us where to find him. We had lunch on the ship and that's when things turned creepy. A group of girls had claimed a table to themselves and were just chatting and eating. Then a man came up to them and started talking to them in Russian. They apologized and said they only knew English and he left. Then he came back a few minutes later and sat at the table, right next to them. After a few minutes of having him stare at them, they moved to a different table in a different part of the ship. A few minutes later, the same man appeared and sat right next to them again. Then one of them saw him take out a camera and take a few pictures of them. Having enough of this, a group of 3 set off to find either a parent or a teacher. It's a school trip, remember. They hit the jackpot and most of the teachers and a few parents all sitting together and told them what was happening. The trip leader went off to find some employee on the ship to help us out, and the rest all came to the table of girls. Once the adults came crowding in, the man left. The girls all felt better, but stuck with the adults just to be safe. Then one girl, Mary, went to the bathroom. She knew another person was already in there and felt safe enough to go on her own. Then, on her way, she saw the same creepy man from before. She hurried past him. Outside the ladies' room, she turned back. He was waiting for her at the end of the hall. She went into the bathroom and started hyperventilating. What she didn't know is that one of the dads followed her just to be on the safe side and saw her being followed. He brushed right past the creepy man and stood guard at the bathroom door, being sure to give the man a proper glare. The man walked off in a hurry. Once he was gone, the dad knocked on the bathroom door and told Mary that he would wait for her, and it was safe to come out. The trip leader found someone who spoke English and told them what had happened, and they said they would keep a lookout for the man and make sure he got stopped, if he was caught leaving the ship. No one saw him again, so I assumed that he was caught somewhere, or had snuck off with his pictures of the underage girls. When I was about 6 years old, my family went on vacation to the beach in Florida. I'm a lot younger than my siblings, so while they were doing their own thing with their friends, I was stuck wherever my mom would take me. For the most part, we stayed in the extremely crowded pool area by our hotel, which had direct access to the beach. It's all a bit hazy, but at some point when I was swimming, I looked up where my mom was supposed to be sitting, and she wasn't there. I was really attached to her, so I got out and started looking for her. I scanned all of the chairs, took a trip around the bar next to the pool, but I couldn't find her. For some reason, 6-year-old me decided she'd gone for a walk on the beach without me, so I made my way out there looking for her. I walked about half a mile down the beach out of the crowds to a more vacant area, and just remember starting to cry because I thought I'd never see my mom again. Just as I basically had given up, a woman and a man came up to me. They asked me who I was, if I had any family nearby, and I told them I was alone and was looking for my mother. They said to me that they had seen my mother and told me they would hang out until she came back for me. Well, these people took me about 2 miles away from the hotel. We walked down the beach to a more residential area. They kept insisting that my mom was going to be down on the other end of the beach and that they were going to take care of me. They tried to get me to build sandcastles with them, play in the water with them, and even told me that we could leave to go get dinner and they'd bring me back afterwards. I kept telling them no, and that I wanted to return to my hotel so that I could go up to my room and check for my mother there. And that's when they got really upset with me. The woman said to me, "We're going to leave, go get dinner at our house, and we will bring you back to your hotel afterwards. Got it?" I was starting to get really nervous, so I told them I didn't want to go with them and that I could walk back to my hotel on my own. The man then said, and I will never forget this, "You're coming home with us for dinner." He said it in one of those creepy do-it-or-die kind of tones. I don't know, it just stuck with me. Lucky for me, I heard my name in the distance. There was a group of people yelling for me. I bolted over to them, and they asked who I was. When I told them my name, they smiled so big and said, "There are lots of people looking for you." When I turned around to tell the group that a man and woman had been hanging out with me, they were gone. The group, which actually ended up being hotel workers, took me back to my hotel where everyone was waiting. There was a fire truck, an ambulance, and news crews all there because I had been gone for over half the day. The entire hotel pool area had been shut down, and efforts to arrange search parties. My mother was sobbing, and all was okay. When I told the hotel workers what had happened, they were extremely concerned. Apparently, not even a week before, a child went missing in their beach access area. When that kid was found, he claimed a man and a woman lured him out to their car, where they tried to forcibly take him home with them. And that's when he bolted away and found another family for help. I'm not exactly an experienced boater or sailor, but for a couple of months last year, I lived in South Africa and did marine research with some of the people who make Shark Week. The work involves sailing out each morning, attracting sharks to the research vessel, about 21 feet with 2 engines, and then collecting data about them by various means. Going into this project, I had very little knowledge of marine biology, and as a result, I was usually relegated to the role of chummer. This lucky individual has the role of grinding up large quantities of rotting sardine heads and continuously pouring them off the side of the boat to attract white sharks. My experience took place on the first time I went chumming. It was a beautiful summer morning and we had just set out in one of the primary research locations, a reef colloquially referred to as Shark City by the locals. The seas were unusually rough, and we were watching quite large waves hit the beach, about 1/3 of a mile from where we had laid anchor. The process of grinding up the rotting fish matter involves the chum dance, standing in a rectangular container in a pair of rain boots. I was crushing the fishy remnants while dancing to Michael Jackson's Thriller, a favorite amongst the researchers. Just as the chum dance reached its finale and a fair amount of rotting sardine was in the water, the crow's nest spotter hastily pointed to a white glimmer just a few feet off of our starboard side. We had gotten lucky. A 15-foot female great white had come to investigate the fishy carnage. Contrary to popular belief, white sharks don't circle boats near the surface with their fins above water. They are indeed ambush hunters, swimming in sporadic patterns around prey, diving to depths below sight, and then eventually striking in a rush from below. We researchers, me in particular, considering I had never seen a shark before, were giddy as this large female made a few loops around the vessel before disappearing into the iron-green abyss. If you're still listening at this point, you may have already guessed what happened next. About a minute later, as I was peering off the side, still standing in the chum container, I noticed that the jovial South African laughter behind me had abruptly stopped. I turned around to see a large wave, 10 to 15 feet, coming in quickly on our broadside. In the few seconds before adrenaline set in, I remember seeing the wall of water crashing over me, spinning, floating. I had been flung overboard by the freak wave. Dear listeners, at this point in the story, you must consider who I was at the time. A jet-lagged, somewhat nerdy, skinny American teenage boy outside of the United States for the first time. There I was, floating in the South African Sea a couple thousand miles from home, in a cloud of rotting sardine matter. Ah yes, the chum container had been flung off the boat with me, with a 15-foot great white shark swimming probably a few yards below. I have very little memory of the next few seconds, my mind clouded by adrenaline. My salvation came in the form of a large arm that pulled me back aboard the boat, which had luckily not capsized. Oh, what joyous breaths of salty ocean air I breathed in. I can think of a few good things that came out of this sharky episode. For one, it accelerated my getting to know the researchers, who, presumably as a result of our mutual peril, welcomed me with open arms for the rest of my time in Africa. The large shark, which is seen regularly to this day in Shark City, was named after me. Finally, this experience gave me the opportunity to share my PSA to everyone I tell it to. Sharks are incredible creatures. They should be respected, admired, and protected. I'm not going to tell you that they shouldn't be feared. They definitely should be, to a very healthy extent. However, when you consider how many people are killed each year in shark attacks versus how many sharks are slaughtered for sport, trophies, or fins, you think that we are indeed a far greater threat to them than they are to us. You've probably heard all of this before, but I think it's worth it to say, if you've made it all the way to the end of my story, thank you for listening. Prior to joining the U.S. Navy, my grandfather took me aside and told me several stories of his time spent in the Navy during World War II. It was his way of ensuring I knew what I was getting into. My grandfather was a weapons technician 2, or WT2, aboard the destroyer USS Maury DD-401 from 1942 to 1945 and manned a 5.38 caliber cannon. He survived Pearl Harbor, battle over Tarawa, Battle of Midway, and the invasion of Luzon, to name a few, with only a small shrapnel wound to his leg in all that time. I'd like to share one of his stories because this one just blows my mind still to this day. Date: August 21st, 1943. Location: WSW of Nindo Island, Solomons. Ship: USS Maury DD-401 destroyer. The Maury was escorting an HMAS Australian vessel to Santo as Japanese forces were still active in the area and Allied forces were actively attempting to keep Guadalcanal and the Solomons secure after previous weeks of battle with the Japanese forces. The night was clear with every star in the sky. The wind was so low that you could hear gulls fishing off in the distance and the wakes splashing against the hulls of the ships. The air felt like Hawaii in spring, and all you could do was bask in the moonglow. Suddenly, voice radio communications from nearby Allied island bases started chirping away with information about visual confirmation of enemy subs in the area to the north. Soon after, all on-deck order was given and everyone was forced stand ready. A team was assigned light patrol, and they began panning around, looking for subs. Not more than 2 hours goes by with no visual contact made. They are finally given order to stand down and return to shut-eye duty. Before daybreak, contacts from Nindo Island start coming on voice comms warning that potentials are flying around in the area just 5 miles south of Maury's escort position. Already worried that they may have been targeted by Japanese subs from their bow, they now have to contend with potential aerial assault, and everyone is called to stand ready once more. Engines are killed, emergency lights activated, and orders given to kill all lights. My grandfather, manning his light, is immediately ordered to put that candle out, and pushes the searchlight straight down into the water, turning it off. When they finally stop moving, the crew can hear the low-tone hummings of several planes passing parallel to their position. Everyone holds their breath and pretends to pretty much not exist, hoping the enemy doesn't make visual contact with the ships. So for a good long 45 minutes, everyone just sits there until they can no longer make audible contact with their enemy forces they hoped would pass. Finally, after almost 2 hours of nothing, they are given the go-ahead to start the engines and return to passage. My grandfather flicks his cigarette port side and clicks on his searchlight, still pointing into the water. What he says he saw next aged him and 2 others with him a good 10 years. Below, where the spotlight sat focused in on the water, lay an eyeball the size of a basketball, sitting there staring straight back at him from about 10 feet underwater. The next 3 seconds lasted minutes in his mind as he watched this silvery disk of an eye look straight through him. Finally, the first of the engines started in what seemed like forever, and the beast broke surface for a brief moment in order to dive deep. Even before people acknowledged giant squid existed, before they were ever caught on camera, my grandfather believed because he had seen one within 20 feet of his face. In my 8 years of service, I had heard many stories of such things and even own a few teeth pulled from the rubber liner of a ship, but never had any such experiences myself. Adding that experience in lieu of the drama of war, and you can get a sense of the true terror it would invoke. My grandfather, now 93, is still alive and kicking. Even though dementia is heavy and he seems to live in the past, it's still good to know that there are still some heroes left in this world. I circumnavigated the globe from the ages of 23 to 25 on a 43-foot sailboat. One of the freakiest incidents we had on board was when we were leaving Singapore in the middle of the night. Aside from the constant game of frogger-dodging freighters, our path was fairly straightforward. At about 3 a.m., I was alone at the helm, with everybody else asleep down below. Suddenly, I hear a beep from the radar, which had been set to warn about anything within a quarter-mile of our vessel. Looking down, I couldn't find anything obvious within that range, so I put the boat on autopilot and went down to investigate. Typically, other ships show up as little blobs, but for some reason, the radar wasn't registering a long, solid line, the length of the screen, directly in front of us, and it was getting closer. Fast. Heart racing, I went back on deck to see what could possibly be registering such a bizarre signature. Eyes slowly adjusting, I looked into the dark, peering as hard as I could to make out something. Anything. And then, I saw it. Not more than 100 yards ahead was a 20-foot-high unlit rock-solid wall. Right there in the middle of the ocean, looming and, by this point, making its presence known by the sound of waves lapping against it. I was absolutely petrified. Mind you, this was before chart plotters were widely used, and we were navigating with proper charts. I was utterly confused and supremely terrified. I called all hands on deck, and we stopped the boat dead, pulled down the sails, and started the engine. Slowly, painstakingly, we picked our way through what was by that time increasingly apparent, a full-on construction zone. Our charts were only 2 years old, but apparently, Singapore had undergone a monumental land reclamation. Or perhaps nuclamation, since it was never there to begin with. Project in the meantime. Ever since we found our way out, nobody slept for the rest of the night. To this day, the image of magically appearing dark walls in the middle of the ocean haunts my dreams. In 1981, Rhode Island resident Stephen Callahan felt like his life was falling apart, and he wanted an escape. Following a divorce from his wife, he constructed a 21-foot ship called the Napoleon Solo to do just that, sail the sea solo, without anyone else around. He left Newport, Rhode Island for Bermuda, and then crossed the Atlantic Ocean to England and Spain. He was near the Canary Islands, which lay off the coast of Africa, when he woke up to a thud in the darkness of night. He believes now it was either a whale or a large shark accidentally bumping the hull. When he stood up, he found his small boat was rapidly filling with water. Callahan threw what supplies he could into a tiny 6-foot life raft. This included a sleeping bag, flare gun, spear gun, food, water, and some survival stills. For the next 76 days, he was at the mercy of the ocean as his raft drifted all the way across the Atlantic, battling storms and leaks the whole way. During the trip, Callahan survived mostly by fishing, although it took him 14 days to learn how to use the spear gun. Still, the fish provided food which he ate raw. One of the fish he speared, a mahi-mahi, nearly sank the raft when its sharp fins pierced the hull. Somehow, Callahan managed to make a latch that held. He couldn't get the water stills to desalinate ocean water properly, and he was down to his last few cans of water when he was finally spotted by fishermen off the coast of Guadalupe. He had lost nearly 40 pounds but lived to tell the tale. Callahan later wrote a book, Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea in 1986, and also served as a consultant on the film Life of Pi. He stated in a piece with The Guardian that he does not regret the experience and feels it changed his life for the better, even if he never wants to experience it ever again. In 1983, the 23-year-old Tammy Lee Oldham Ashcraft set sail for Tahiti with her fiancé, 34-year-old Richard Sharp, in a 36-foot sailboat named the Hazana. They had been hired by the boat's new owner to deliver it to San Diego, California. They left Tahiti on September 22nd, sailing without incident until October 12th. Unfortunately, their boat got caught in 40-foot seas and high winds from Hurricane Raymond, which was a Category 4 storm. During the worst part of the hurricane, Sharp told Ashcraft to go below for safety. While Sharp was still on deck, the last thing Ashcraft heard from Sharp was him screaming, "Oh my God," before a large wave threw her against the cabin and knocked her out for 27 hours. When she awoke, her fiancé was gone, lost overboard. Unfortunately, the ship's radio and navigation systems got soaked by seawater as the ship was half sunk. The storm had also taken out the sailboat's masts. She survived mostly on canned goods from the boat's life raft. Fortunately, Ashcraft had some experience sailing. She was able to jerry-rig a makeshift mast, and once she figured out where she was, she got the boat into the north equilateral current, which helped her cover more miles and set a course for Hawaii. Ashcraft has since admitted in interviews she considered ending her own life the last few days. Luckily, after 41 days adrift, she was finally rescued near Hilo, Hawaii, on November 22, 1983. About the time I was 17 or so, a few friends and I were out at the beach making dry ice bombs in the middle of the night. Probably midnight or so, we were quite delinquent back then. There were about 5 or 6 of us, and we were just chilling and having a good time, trying to make potholes in the ground with dry ice bombs in the sand. It was a quite foggy night, which isn't too unusual considering I live on the northwest coast, Oregon, and it rains here 300 days out of the year. After 30 minutes or so of being rambunctious teenagers, we decided to walk down the beach a bit. After about 10 to 15 minutes of walking, we hear a strange scratching or grinding sound, and stop and listen. Sooner than 20 seconds later, a tall figure emerges from the fog, adjacent to the ocean but between us and the ocean. This MFer had to be at least 8 foot tall, and it was dragging a chain. Not just your average chain, but like a freaking massive chain that looked like it was used for an anchor or something. The rings were probably 8 to 12 inches long apiece, and it looked like they had to be at least an inch in diameter. Now, this chain wasn't short by any means. It was probably 40 to 50 feet long, and this dude was just dragging it in the sand behind him, in the middle of the night. We all sat there silently, and I got the biggest shiver down my spine, and all my hair stood on end, and my breath seemed to escape me. We gathered watching the figure cross our path and make its way up the beach. It and the chain slowly faded out of sight. Well, that was freaking creepy as hell, I thought. We then continued back down the beach to a shipwreck called the Peter Iredale, which is all but eroded by now, and took in the cool sea spray and enjoy the ominous whooshing of the serene ocean waves. We tossed a couple dry ice bombs into the water and head back to our car, where we were parked probably half a mile up the shore. As we are walking, we hear that freaking noise again. My heart thumps and I get the cold sweats. It was that freaking thing again, trudging that damn chain up the beach. It had to have been the exact place where we saw it the first time. There were no drag marks in front of him, no footsteps, no indication that anyone had laid foot on the ground in front of him in that path it had previously walked. The sand was dry, and it wasn't washed over by waves or anything of the sort. We watched it for a moment out of curiosity as to what the actual hell is going on. We stood there dumbfounded, watching the figure trudge through the sand with this unfathomably massive chain dragging behind it. It stopped dragging the Satan chain and stared directly at us, piercing our soul and the essence of our being. We stood there, jaw dropped, staring back at the shadow figure. It begins to slowly march towards us, and we freaking book it through the sand. I have never ran so fast in all my life. We all pile into the car. Bro turns the engine and we freaking floor it out of there, easily hitting 80 miles per hour on the straight stretch of the access road. Absolutely hauled serious ass out of there. The entire time, I was staring out the back window of the car, some reason expecting it to Terminator after us and catch up to us. Thankfully, it didn't, and I never saw the shadowy figure again. It was the strangest, most heart-wrenchingly terrifying thing I have ever experienced. None of us were on any drugs. We were all straight-edge kids, clean as a whistle. The shadow figures and their chains, scaring kids. Shame on them. A week or so later, a friend of ours who wasn't there with us that night told me that people used to practice black magic in the dunes there, and that there were artifacts of demonology and inverted crosses scattered about. I called bullshit on his accusations of such occurrences. Turns out it was true. I went to the mom and asked her about it, and she said she had heard similar stories. So, naturally, we looked into it a bit, and then went out to search for said black magic devil-worshipping sites. We were able to find some inverted crosses, which were made of some sort of metal that was all but rusted over, and concrete blocks, probably a cubic meter in size, in a few different places. Holes bored through them and metal rings inserted through them, as if it to be an anchor point. I put two and two together and theorized that freaking chain was at one point connected to these blocks in the dunes, for Lord knows what purpose. I assume that creature was of black magic or demonology, and will never set foot in those freaking godforsaken cursed dunes of Delivery again. In a more recent survival tale, Lewis Jordan set sail from South Carolina on January 23, 2015, on a fishing trip, only to be awakened by his 35-foot boat capsizing in a storm in the middle of the night. The storm snapped his ship's mast and broke his radio and communications equipment, stranding him at sea. The accident also broke his collarbone. After not hearing from him for a week, Lewis's family reported him missing on January 29th, but searchers called off the rescue approximately 10 days later. For the next 66 days, Lewis survived on a combination of food that he had on board plus whatever he could catch in a net. He used his dirty laundry to attract fish close enough to the wrecked vessel to net. Fortunately, he was able to collect and ration out rainwater. Finally, Lewis was spotted approximately 200 miles from the shore by a German cargo ship. The Coast Guard airlifted him from the ship back to dry land, where he called his family to announce the good news of his rescue himself. It's worth noting that Lewis admitted he was not an experienced sailor. He had told no one where he was planning on going, which is why search crews could not narrow down where he was. His story is a reminder to always tell someone where you are going when hitting the open ocean. On the 23rd of December 2008, a small fishing boat from Thailand, carrying 20 crew members, broke apart in choppy waters. The majority of the crew were washed overboard and never seen again, while the boat itself sank without a trace. Two men from Burma, who we'll dub survival and instincts, got through the initial disaster by climbing inside a large icebox normally used to store caught fish. During their 25 days floating at sea in a large icebox, the pair, aged 22 and 24, were subjected to 50-knot winds caused by Cyclone Charlotte. It is only through sheer good fortune that the Icebox did not capsize during these brutal elemental onslaughts. As it so happened, the extreme weather conditions ended up being a blessing in disguise for survival and instincts. With the rainwater, a natural side effect of the storms, providing them with fresh drinking water on a daily basis. They floated on the waves with only some dead fish at the bottom of their Icebox lifeboat for company, until the 17th of January. It would seem that Lady Luck was smiling on the pair, if you ignore the initial sinking of their fishing boat, because it was only by sheer fluke that a customs search plane spotted them and came to their rescue. Following their rescue, 60 nautical miles northwest of Horn Island, the pair were treated for severe dehydration, starvation, and a nasty bout of sunburn. The pair had survived 25 days floating in an icebox in shark-infested waters. In April of 2015, American Louis Jordan was spotted by the crew of a German tanker. He was sitting on the overturned hull of his 35-foot boat. He'd been missing at sea for 66 days and had survived by catching fish and drinking rainwater. After his rescue, 200 miles off the coast of North Carolina, Jordan told reporters, quote, "Every day I was like, please God, send me some rain, send me some water," end quote. He went on to say that he initially thought the German container ship was a figment of his imagination, and that the crew did not see him until he began waving his arms in their direction. During this ordeal at sea, Jordan rationed himself to roughly 1 pint of water a day, but relieved that, for such a long time, I was so thirsty. A helicopter took him to a hospital in Norfolk, Virginia, where, amazingly, he was able to stand and walk without assistance. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, he was diagnosed with dehydration. This is a story that happened to me when I was a child. I thought I'd share it with you. I've never shared this with anyone really before, so here we go. This took place around 2008, if my memory serves me correctly. Me and my family had just moved to Costa Rica, and we enjoyed spending most of our time at the beach. One beach in particular, which was near a lovely little river I like to swim in. It was on this same beach that 9-year-old me found a dead body floating in the ocean. To give a little context, I'd been playing on the beach, which we thought was a relatively safe beach, so my parents were farther up. How wrong we were about it being safe. I remember seeing something floating in the water, but I wasn't sure what it was, so I went to investigate and found a dead man just floating there. Part of his leg had been hacked off. It was obvious he had not been drowned. The man had clearly been murdered. Around this time, we had heard about a recent string of murders that had happened both on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, where we were, and on the Pacific side. The murders had been happening every 6 months, rotating in between both regions of the country. So there was reason to assume this murder had been done by the same person, since it fit the timeline. As far as I can remember, the details of the murder were never disclosed in any of the local newspapers, only that the man had been a tourist from England. So there was no way for anyone who had not seen the man on the beach to know the specifics of his murder. Eventually, the whole thing blew over, and we returned to that same beach. I can't quite remember a time frame, but it was definitely within a few months of me finding the dead man that this next part happened. One day I was swimming in the river with my mother, when a very strange man popped up out of the water, startling us. He had a spear gun in hand and a snorkel mask on. Anyways, he began talking to my mom, and I think we could both tell that something was just off about this guy. I wasn't really paying attention for most of their conversation, but I do remember him bringing up the recent murder on the beach, and he seemed to know a great lot of details about it, which, as I previously mentioned, were not available to the public. It almost seemed as if he was trying to confess that he was the one who murdered the man, but without directly saying so. He also talked about how he traveled in between the Caribbean and the Pacific side of Costa Rica, spending half a year in each spot. Eventually, they also got on the topic of what he did for a living, and he went into great detail about how he made the masks for the movie Eyes Wide Shut, and that he would make those masks, and I presume other ones, based on real live human emotions, and that he specifically liked capturing the look of fear. We were totally taken aback by this guy and didn't really know what to do. Eventually, he just got back into the river and swam away, and thankfully, we never saw him again. I do not know if this is related or not, but the weird strain of murders suddenly stopped right after that. This happened about 7 years ago. I was staying at my friend Diana's house. She lives pretty close to a small beach, which is really more of a vague shoreline, but it's still nice. We both enjoy going on adventures, so one night we decided to go for a walk and ended up walking along the shore. Her dog Penny was with us, occasionally running out into the water, doing cute dog things. I'm not a huge dog person, so I'm not sure what kind of dog she was, but she was a medium-sized dog. Not big, but way too big to be called small. We were only there for about 10 minutes before we heard a twig snap from the forest at the edge of the shore. Both of us froze, listening to see if we could hear anything. We thought we heard someone shushing someone else, but brushed it off as us being paranoid. We remained on high alert anyway. The tide was coming in, and there was only one way back to safety, a single path which we had come down on. Everywhere else was essentially a cliff, covered in thorns and whatnot. Not very fun to climb. We start making our way back to the path, taking our shoes off since we realized we waited too long and wouldn't make it before the water reached us. As we were walking, we heard more twigs snapping in the forest and hushed voices. We looked at each other and paused. Diana asked me what she should do, and I really didn't know. Everyone at her home was asleep. We couldn't call them, and we didn't want to call the police if it wasn't a dangerous situation. I ended up telling her we had no choice, and we had to make it to the path before the tide came in. We started again, picking up the pace a little, coaxing Penny along the way. It's at this moment that we heard a growl and a low bark, followed quickly with more shushing sounds. I could hear the voices, though I don't remember what I heard them say. There was 2 men and they had a dog. There are no houses this close to the shore. Diana's house is the closest, and it's a good 5-minute walk away. The forest that surrounds the shore is pretty thick, and not good for camping in. There is no viable reason for someone to just be hanging out in there. We both register this and start to run. I heard one of the men yell, "Go get 'em!" and heard the dog's collar jingle as it started to run. Penny was right behind us, so when we saw the silhouette of a dog in front of us, we knew it wasn't her. The dog started growling, and Penny was bouncing around playfully behind us, clearly not sensing this dog's aggression. She was a pretty young dog. We stood still, unsure of what to do. The sounds of twigs breaking was getting closer, and Diana carefully knelt down to get a rock and tossed it toward the forest, to which the dog, and Penny, went chasing after it. Diana was worried about Penny, but we both kept running, hardly stopping for a breath when we made it to the path, before the tide, I might add. We could see flashlight beams in the forest and heard the men cursing and clumsily maneuvering through the branches. We called for Penny as silently as we could, but she never came. We ended up having to leave without her, as the men were getting too close. We ran back to her house and locked the door, and I haven't talked about what happened since. Penny showed up the next morning, perfectly fine, in case anyone was wondering about her. I've had a few strange occurrences with sketchy people, but this one was the only one that I felt truly in danger. When I was around 7 or 8, my family went to the beach and rented a room. We had the kind of rooms where you could rent out both and they connected through a door. In the room connected to ours, there was this army family, military dad, some kids, and a wife. My older sister was supposed to be watching me, as we were down at the Jacuzzi during the evening. As we're playing and hanging out and just having a good time, I didn't get out much, was naive and all around a little kid. We both were white-skinned, blue eyes, and blonde hair. This mom literally sits in the jacuzzi with us. She starts talking to us and is just making herself real comfortable. I was a very naive kid. Eventually, we start talking about books, and she's talking about her kids, who were never even seen. And we're just having a good conversation. Really in depth, I felt like. My sister decides she wants to go back to the room, but I don't. I wanted to stay and talk with the mom. So my sister goes back to the room, and now it's just 7-year-old me and some 40-year-old woman. It should have set off some creepy alarms, but it didn't. So she starts talking about going and walking on the beach. It's like 10 p.m. She wants to go walk on the beach and get seashells. I thought it was a great idea. I'd get to walk on the beach at night. I felt so free and like a big kid. I didn't need my sister or anything. So I run back to the room to tell my grandparents that I'm walking on the beach with Sue, or whatever her name was. I remember my grandmother reading her book, barely listening to what I said. She just shooed me off. It is important to know I didn't live with my parents. So I start walking down the creepy motel corridor. I'm going through the stairwell like something out of a movie. Too bad I'd never seen this movie. So I'm walking through the stairwell. The mom's way at the bottom telling me to hurry up and this and that. While walking through the stairs, Army Dad comes running, hauling ass to where I'm at. He told me, "Your mom is calling you. It's really important. We gotta go." And basically grabbed me by the wrist, softly yet aggressively. It led me back to our room. He knocked on the door and explained what had happened. I never thought much of it till about a year ago when it came back to me. This woman was leading me away to the beach alone at night, and this army guy got a terrible feeling in his gut, so he intervened. When he said my mom was looking for me, as I don't live with my mom, it set off some alarms in my head. That's when I realized something was up, so I didn't resist going back to my family. As a kid, I knew since he was saying my mom wanted me, it was important. I just knew something was up because I don't live with my mom. I'm now 20 years old, and I truly believe that Mom was trying to lure me away, to do God knows what. And this army dude had a bad feeling and saved my life. Thinking back, I get such a bad feeling all throughout my body. I know now I wouldn't have made it back from that beach trip. Hello everyone. First of all, I'm not a native English speaker, so please be indulgent with me. Every year, for summer holidays, me and my family go to my grandparents' house in a region in France called Britannia, and they have the luck to live on a cliff right next to the beach, which is pretty neat. And for you to understand the situation I was in, I'll do a quick description of the place and most importantly, how to cross the beach. When we got out of the house, we need to cross a little road and get to an entrance between bushes. Then it's a clear but narrow path that you can take just to enjoy the view of the sea, or you can also go to a staircase built in the rock of the cliff. Then you'll just have to walk on medium-sized stones and ta-da, you've arrived at the beach. The place itself is pretty big, but there's only a few ways to access it. By the staircase I described or by another one at the other end. Also, big thing to mention, as I grew older, I stopped building sandcastles and swimming with my family. I'm 18 and the older of 3 other siblings, way younger than me, so I was done playing child's game. And I had started to climb the cliffs for fun. Not the steep ones. It was more so a semi-hiking of partially collapsing cliffs. This will be relevant later. Now, on to the story. Last year, after having dinner, I headed out for a little walk on the beach. No one seemed determined to come with me, so I went alone. No big deal. I did it every evening. After going down the staircase, I walked a little bit and then sat down on a stone to smoke a joint and listen to some music. Not really smart, but hey, I'm a teen in a little village that I go to every summer, and as much as I love my family, it gets pretty boring from time to time. Anyway, I'm enjoying my time when I spot a guy in the corner of my eye at maybe 40 meters from me. No big deal. It's a free access beach after all. But then he starts heading his way towards me. His head was shaved, and he had square-shaped glasses on, maybe around his mid-20s or early 30s. He was pretty tan, like he worked outside for a long time. The bald dude is getting closer, but again, I don't own the beach. As he's coming next to me, I hear over my music that he's trying to talk to me. I removed my headphones and he said something along the lines of, "Hey, you look familiar. Have we met before?" I answered with a calm and firm no, but he keeps insisting that he saw me at the beach today. And sure, I said maybe he did. But there are tons of people at the beach. I don't remember everyone I see. The way I'm responding clearly implies that I'm not interested in having a conversation with him. But he sits on a stone next to me and he keeps talking, mostly about himself. That he loves the beach, the weather is nice, that I'm nice with him. That's where it got creepy. He says that it's rare to find nice girls and he's happy I'm not a stuck-up rude kind of girl. He then asks about my name, where I live, and of course I didn't say a thing. He started to lean closer to me, which made me really uncomfortable, always with a huge grin on his face. That's when it hit me. Remember when I said that they were only a few entrances to the beach? That butthole was sitting right between me and the staircase. I was cornered. No one was there. We were completely alone. And even though I'm quite athletic, I'm 4'9" and weigh 90 pounds. This guy for me is twice my size, and he clearly wants to continue our discussion. As I'm not responding, he started to sound annoyed, clenching his fist, but still with his stupid grin glued to his face. He asked me if I really was a good girl, and why won't I talk to him? I'm shitting myself at this point when I look at my left and almost let out a sigh of relief. One of the cliff I'm used to climbing onto is right next to us, and even if I said that they are more like hiking than climbing, I could rush to the top of it in a matter of seconds as I'm used to doing it, run on the narrow path and go home safely. So I got up and said, "I don't want to talk anymore. Good evening." He looked startled for a moment, looking back at the staircase for a second, which confirmed my suspicions. He thought he was blocked by my only way of escaping, since the other stairs were too far. To this day, it still scares me that it was his first reaction. At this point, I'm high, tired, and terrified, but I start to walk confidently to the cliff at a high pace. And in the corner of my eye, I can see that he is standing now, looking in my direction. As soon as I'm close enough, I literally start to jump from rock to rock as fast as I can, scratching myself in the process. When I arrive at the top, I look down and he is looking at me, not smiling like before, but frowning and looking like he is on the verge of committing a crime. I then sprinted to my grandparents' house, which luckily is damn close, and explained everything to my mother. And the next day, I reported the guy to the police station, giving the best description that I could. Since it's a small village, they could apprehend him easily if he was a resident, but to be fair, the French police sucks, and nothing ever came of it. This story takes place about a week ago. Myself and a friend had decided to go to the beach as we both couldn't sleep. So we arrive at the beach, which will remain unnamed, but for reference, is on the western coast of New Zealand. Our story begins when we were driving out to the beach. The beach is a long and windy one this time. I have driven this road hundreds of times before, both with and without someone in the vehicle with me. I start to get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach as we drive past a usually closed car park on the right, which is open. It has never been open in the 15 or so years I have been coming to this place. Now, the time was around 11:30 p.m. We both commented on it but shrugged it off at the thoughts of the amazing photos we would be able to take with the last night of the full moon. As we arrived at the beach, we parked our car in the unlit car park further down the beach than the river I let to the sea. Having growing up around this particular beach, I'm very confident when it comes to where I am. So we lock the car and head down the sandy path to the black and white stained surface of the beach. The moonlight casting a creepy glow over everything while providing light for us to walk. We start to head east down the beach towards a large cave situated right at the end. This cave is hidden by a huge sand dune that is, I imagine, accumulated sand from the years of the wind whipping it up. This was our destination at the top of this dune. Gives one a very unique view of the water. As we head towards this dune, we hear and smell the crackling burning of wood nearby. In this country, it is strictly against the law to have fires on or anywhere near this beach. We noticed a small fire sitting off to the right about 150 meters from where we were. I noticed from the corner of my eye that there didn't appear to be anyone around this fire, just a fire burning randomly in the tall flammable grass next to the dunes. My friend, who we will call Casey, pointed out the fire to me and we both shrugged it off as some teenagers may be having some drinks, even though there was no sound around except the crackling of the fire and the slight wind on the beach. About 100 meters down the beach, we encounter the first of the night's, shall we say, issues. I see a man sitting in the middle of the sand, just staring out at the water. I didn't initially think this was weird, but upon further inspection, the guy was just staring out at the water, apparently not aware of the two people calling out to him. Strange, but hey, some people are weird, right? So we get to the dune and climb up the 20 or so meters of sand to the top. Just for reference, the black cave mouth was to our backs as we snapped picture after picture of the beach and the water all around the moonlit, clear, starry sky. Suddenly, from behind us, comes a strange growling sound, like a dog, but it was fuzzy, like it was a human pretending to be a dog. I'll be honest, by this time I was ready to get the hell out of there, and I looked at Casey and said, I have enough nope in my life. I'm going back to the car. As we were ascending down the sand dune, the sound got louder and louder. It was like it was following us, and every step we took made it move closer. I'll admit, I'm not the fittest of people, and neither is my friend. but the adrenaline kicked in that moment. I grabbed her hand and we booked it down the beach. We only got about 500 meters before the weird staring guy came back into view. This time, he was not staring at the water, he was staring at us. My mother always told me if something doesn't feel right, more than likely it isn't right. I don't know what it was about this man's eyes, but they looked menacing. As we ran towards him, though, he started freaking barking at us. As we passed, he got up on all fours like a dog with his ass in the air and chased us. I have never, ever been so scared in my life. As I ran towards what I thought was the path we came down, I grabbed my friend's hand and guided her up the path. The growling and barking man had not followed us up this path. I don't know why. If it was, he didn't see us go up it, or he was just done messing with us. Spoiler, this path led us deeper into the brush beside the beach. We walked using a single phone flashlight to guide our way. My foot grazed something, not sand nor grass, but more solid. As I shone my light down, I saw it was a chewed-up shoe that looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. As we fumbled through the brush and tall grass, I could see the road. It was so close, yet so far. As I moved towards it, we heard someone yell, "What the hell?" and shone a flashlight at us. It was someone camping in the tall grass. I have never been so happy to see another human being in my life. I said, "We were coming back from the beach and got lost. What's up with the guy who was barking on the beach?" The guide told us he hadn't heard anything and to F off before I smash you. We made it back to the road and realized we were still about 1 kilometer from the car by road, but only about 200 meters by beach. At this time, the internal argument of my lazy self started. We sluggishly walked the roadway, not wanting to go anywhere near the beach. When I got back to my car, I noticed that a part of my trim had been lifted and looked like someone has chewed it. I will never go wandering on that beach at night ever again. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true deep ocean stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you are awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Have a great morning, a good afternoon, or a good night.